Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's getting a little crowded in the back there, so I just want to let you know there are some seats up front here if anybody would like to kind of move forward. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you all are enjoying the first day of Legislative Summit, and thank you so much for coming to our session on state budgets. I'm Erica McKellar, and I'm with the Fiscal Affairs Program at NCSL, and I'm joined today by Jeffrey Buswick, who's the Managing Director and State Government Sector Lead at S&P Global Ratings. I'm going to set the stage a little bit with what we're hearing when it comes to state budget conditions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who'll go into more detail about what S&P is seeing when it comes to state finances. So each year, NCSL surveys legislative fiscal offices a couple of times a year to get a sense of how revenues are performing, expenditures, the strength of rainy day funds, and just kind of the general overall conditions in the states. And we just recently sent out our most recent survey in June and July as states were wrapping up their fiscal year 2026 budgets. And we have about half of those surveys back so far. So I'm just going to kind of give a high-level look at what some of those preliminary results say about budget conditions around the country and some of the challenges that states are facing. So in the past few years, the revenue picture for states has been a bit of a roller coaster. Prior to the pandemic, states had been kind of seeing a continuing trend of moderate growth of about 2 to 4% year over year since the Great Recession. Then during the pandemic, state revenues took a big hit, but not as much as experts were predicting. And as states recovered, they unexpectedly saw these big revenue surpluses, and that was due to a number of factors, including the large amount of aid that the federal government sent to states. And during this period, that revenue growth jumped to around 15%. But states always knew that that level of growth was really unsustainable and have been really planning for kind of a return to normal of state revenue growth and a revenue slowdown that I think we're seeing now. So according to the survey results, states saw modest revenue growth in fiscal year 2025 of about 2.4%. And I think that's a little better than many states had been anticipating. We asked states in January how their revenues were performing, and several states mentioned that they had revised their forecast upwards. But this is still definitely in line, I think, with the slowing growth that states have been experiencing coming off of those big surpluses after the pandemic. In fiscal year 2026, states expect that slowing growth to continue, with general fund revenue growth projected to be about 1% on average. On the expenditure side, in fiscal year 2025, average state spending was about 4% higher than it was in fiscal year 2024. As I mentioned, revenue growth that year was about 2.4%, and I think states were largely making up that gap with those surplus funds that they had that they've been carrying forward. And states have spent a lot of those funds on one-time projects and initiatives. For spending in fiscal year 2026, states are projected to spend about 0.6% less on average than they did in fiscal year 2025. So we're starting to see states rein in that spending a little bit as these surpluses kind of decline and disappear. Budget season for many states will be gearing up here soon in the fall, and we're starting to hear that states are asking agencies to submit either flat budgets or to prepare for some program cuts, and I think that's a trend that we'll see continue. The good news heading into a slower growth period is that states have really built up their rainy day funds. States had already been rebuilding those funds after the Great Recession, but the federal assistance that states saw coming out of the pandemic, plus those big surpluses, really accelerated that pace. But when we talk about overall state budget health, we usually point to state year-end balances. So that's a state's rainy day fund plus any closing balances that they're carrying forward. And we look at it as a percentage of state spending. And prior to the pandemic, state year-end balances as a percentage of state spending were about 10% on average, which was up from a low of about 4% during the Great Recession. In fiscal year 2023, after we saw those record surpluses, that percentage soared to over 30%. And now that number has started to come back down. The preliminary average from our survey shows about 16% for fiscal year 2025. So that's putting most states on pretty firm footing. At this point, we're not seeing states make big withdrawals to their rainy day funds for the most part. And in fact, a lot of states are still adding to those. And I think the decline in year-end balances as a share of state spending is because states are spending down those surplus funds. We're seeing those decline. So we're seeing smaller closing balances. That accounts for that difference. Overall, states ended fiscal year 2025, I think, in a fairly strong position. Revenue growth was moderate, but higher than many states had expected. And there are a handful of states that closed some budget shortfalls, but I think, on average, states were pretty stable heading into fiscal year 2026. I think as states were passing their FY 2026 budgets, what we saw are states really kind of budgeting conservatively and cautiously. Many of you were passing budgets while Congress was still debating H.R. 1. So there was a lot of uncertainty out there as states were crafting these budgets. And I think states largely held spending flat as part of that. However, because states do have those flush rainy day funds, most fiscal offices are still describing the fiscal situation as stable for now. Beyond 2026, I think states are preparing to kind of pull back as that revenue growth continues to slow. As I mentioned, we've been hearing that states are asking agencies to sort of prepare for some cuts or prepare flat budgets, so I think that will continue. As part of the survey, we also asked states what they anticipate their biggest fiscal challenge to be for the upcoming year. And of course, all of you face very unique challenges, but this year, one word really kind of rose to the top, and you can probably guess what it is, and that is uncertainty. There's a lot of economic uncertainty right now, and states, I think, are waiting to see where tariff rates will end up settling and what the overall effect will be both on the larger US economy as well as their individual economies. Other geopolitical factors are obviously also playing into some of this economic uncertainty. I think probably the biggest challenge states face right now is grappling with the federal spending cuts included in H.R. 1. I think most states are still kind of analyzing that bill and kind of figuring out what the full impact of those cuts will be on their states, both in the upcoming fiscal year, but also in, for the next few years, since many of those cuts don't take effect immediately, and some are spread across multiple years. But the two biggest programs that I think we're hearing the most about right now as a challenge to states are Medicaid and SNAP. These were the two specific programs that states have mentioned most often in the survey so far. In addition to H.R. 1, Congress recently passed a rescission package in July that clawed back funds that were previously appropriated. And while those mainly focus on foreign aid and public broadcasting, I think it leaves the door open for more potential rescissions in the future that could affect state budgets. So that is all I have for you today, and that's just a high-level look of what we're hearing from states. And now I'll welcome Jeff Buswick of S&P up to talk to us a little bit more about what they're seeing.
I think so, yeah. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, I think he put it up there. Thank you, that's wonderful. Good. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And welcome as a, I guess, 54-year Massachusetts resident. It's great to have you all in my home state. I get as a job to travel around to your states and your state houses on a regular basis, and so it's always great to see so many people coming here to Massachusetts. And if you do get out, I know the first restaurant that's in the guidebook was Chickadee. It is one of my favorites. It's only about a quarter mile that way. I will recommend it if you haven't been there. I like what Erica said. It's a stable situation for now, and I think that's what we're seeing as well. And I'll go through a little bit of what supports that. If I can, there we go, good. In general, I'll talk about what a credit rating is, what we do at S&P Global Ratings. There are a number of rating agencies. You may use Fitch or Moody's, Kroll across the board. We all do similar things with slightly different criteria, but I'll talk about our criteria, and you can see what that means as you do your day-to-day work. I'll go into the detail to get there, talk about some of the things that we're hearing from you all, and then hopefully have some time for some Q&A. Oh, went the wrong way. All right, so first off, just what is a credit rating? And so I want to start to get us all on the same pages. A credit rating is a relative evaluation of your willingness and ability to repay debt. And I start with that because we rate it on a AAA scale, AA scale, and when people see these letter grades, they think in school, oh, if I have the highest grade, I'm the smartest. And when we're not gauging the intelligence of the management team or the legislature or anything else here, what we're looking at is that willingness and ability to repay debt. If you borrow in the public markets to build something with that capital fund, how readily will you pay it back? Now, the left-hand slide, part of this, oh, that's funny. It's showing a little bit of cutoff. Okay. Left-hand slide is the investment grade. Every state is A- or higher, and I'll show that in a moment. The right-hand slide is speculative grade. You'll often see that in the news as called junk, right? So you think of junk bonds. This is something that we see. We don't call it junk at ours because speculative grade all the way down to the B- level, we expect the borrower to repay their debt on time in accordance with the bond documents through maturity, even down to single B, which is in junk or spec grade. But I think it's something that people have a hard time comparing. Because if you look at the state sector, let me see, here, look at the state sector, we have 90% AA- or higher. In our public finance world, we have 23,500 unique ratings on different security types. It's basically 17 to 18,000 unique issuers. And the median rating is an A+, much lower than the 90% above AA- that the states have. In that, the comparative nature of that would be for corporates, where 3,600 US corporations that we have, and the median rating is single B. They only have about 2.2 that are investment grade, the 10% are investment grade or higher, 2.2 are AA- or higher. So it's how people use the bond markets, where they accept that level of risk. And governments, which are being asked to demonstrate very clearly how the money is being borrowed, where the money is going, wants that cheapest use of funds, where other corporate assets or entities may just want the quickest access to the markets to get the money so they can move on. It's a different world. But what we're sitting at is anywhere in the world for S&P Global Ratings, you all hold the highest average portfolio. No one else is as high as the state ratings. And why is that? Well, a lot of it is what you all do in this room. There is great transparency in what legislators do. You adopt budgets that are balanced, sometimes constitutionally. Actually, I think all 49 states except Vermont has an obligation in the Constitution to balance their budgets on an annual basis. There is expectations between administrations and between governmental bodies to say, it doesn't matter who's in the seat, I'm going to continue doing this in this way. And so the bond markets can say, well, am I going to get what I expect 5 years from now or someone else is in the seat? And the general answer is yes, because the policies are in place, the practices are there, the transparency is needed, and the constitutional obligations for this is strong. So this is why we can look very highly upon the ratings of states. Now, this is a piece that we did a few years ago. It's the top 10 credit characteristics of highly rated entities. And I hope a lot of it here is familiar. The first thing, focus on structural balance. Again, constitutionally obligated. Strong liquidity management. What we find is when there is rapid credit deterioration, those points where people are challenged to pay their debt, the combination that leads to the quickest deterioration is weak liquidity to start and poor or slow management decisions to address the issues coming. So you have good liquidity. If you have strong management, if you have clear policies, we can start you higher. So with that, let me see. Yeah, with that, let me go into how we do what we do. We had 6 disparate pieces of criteria until about a year ago that we rated school districts here and cities and towns here and states here, and we looked at debt this way, and they were a little convoluted and hard to explain all the time. So we combined these 6 pieces into one. This is the one. So now we look at the smallest fire district in your state, which has 400 people who pay the taxes, to the largest state under the same methodology. That can be a challenge, but we think we have the flexibility in there to do it, and we do it in this way. We start with the institutional framework. This is the legal justifications of how you do what you do. I'll show a little bit more on that in the next slide. And then the individual credit profile is the second part. We have those 5 equally weighted parts: the economy, financial performance, reserves, management, debt, and liabilities. And man, there are funny little spaces in there. I'm not sure what that is. But each of those equally balanced, and we have specific measures that I'll talk about to get it. We put them together, and it comes up with an anchor score. Then in our committees, 1 person, 1 vote. We all come in with expertise and training to make sure that we have that vote we are well knowledgeable in what we're doing and what we're voting on for each security type, and we have to pass that and show to the SEC that we have the experience. We can come to that anchor, but in that committee we can decide, you know what, there's something here that we think is being missed. Either this risk is too great and we think we should notch a little bit, pull it down, or we think the benefit and the strengths that we're seeing are so good that we can notch a little bit up. So it's a rather qualitative criteria, but we have that quantitative ability at the end to make sure we get the rating right. And so in looking at that, we have those. So I did say institutional framework, they cut it out, it's cut off again. I'm not sure what happened, I apologize. So we start with the predictability. How clear is it each year that the revenues you think you're going to get, you actually get, right? And we say for states, it's very high. You have personal income taxes first, depending on the state you're in, sales taxes or corporate income taxes next. Some states have property taxes, but you know, it's generally a rather predictable revenue stream. And we see that as a benefit. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't hits and misses, and we see that overall. But in general, it's much more predictable than, say, company B selling widget A, right? That can be hard to predict. Who's going to buy how many widgets? But with the revenues, you can see what your economy is doing, who's expected to have jobs. And so the economic conditions are something that we look at very strongly. I'll get to economy in a moment. We also look at the revenue balance, and then we look at the transparency. And every state does issue GAAP accounting. It's comparable nationally, comparable globally if you use the Government Accounting Standards Board measures. And so we get those regular updates. And again, what's even better is our economists come to we analysts to find out when we're seeing state sales tax revenues slowing. It's actually one of the first indicators of a coming recession that we've seen over time is the good work that your states do to share the monthly revenue data that comes in. If sales tax are declining 3 or 4 months in a row, we'll say, oh, there's something happening, maybe in this state, maybe nationally, and then our economists can go back and try to triangulate what's happening. And so we look at that pretty well, but the transparency the states provide is very high, very strong, and I think very telling. And then for the individual credit profile part of the framework here, I was wondering if I could do anything else, because the next few slides, the right-hand part's a little more. You think the PDF is okay? Okay. See. Okay. So just close it. Oh. 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 Thanks. Oh no, it's okay. I think she's switching to a PDF.
We're switching to
Oh, you have the
PowerPoint.
Okay, you
We
have the
just added
PowerPoint too. Ah, okay. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's where it was. Ah, look at that. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. All right, good stuff. So again, the economy is 20%. We look at that. We're looking at the base of the economy, your gross state product, what you're delivering, and then to income as the initial measures. Then for financial performance, we look through budget cycles. How often are you hitting your budget targets? You come with surpluses, and when you don't have a surplus, how do you solve that problem? Is it mostly recurring solutions, or are you using one-time slugs? It's not always bad to use one time, you just can't use one times more than one time. And so there's the challenge for if you're solving your problem with one-time issues too much. Reserves and liquidity, I'll talk about in a moment. Reserves and liquidity, we have seen a remarkable growth, and Erica talked about it here for what we're seeing for rainy day funds, plus general fund surpluses, plus that other money you squirreled in the corner pocket. I mean, there is a lot of liquidity right now in the state sector. I'll show that in a second, but we see that as a strength. Management is not how good you are, how smart you are, but what we look to, again, is those policies. Are these policies implementable, transparent? Do we expect to see them be able to be repeated and demonstrate with a good process? And then for debt and liabilities, that's what we talk about primarily with you. And so we include in that pensions, other post-employment benefits. What we've been seeing, actually, this is a 5-year snapshot, and it goes back probably a little over 20 years now of declining overall spending of debt at the state level. If you look back around the millennium, it was closer to a 4% total net debt service as a percent of government expenditures. You can see now it's come down to 3%. That is recurring downward trend. You think, well, why are we spending less on debt? Well, some of it is debt avoidance. And there are states, my colleagues or neighbors in Connecticut went on a debt diet, if you hadn't heard that term, and they did not issue a lot of debt for a few years. But as well, there has been so much stimulus funding coming from the federal government that states are saying, why would I borrow and spend money to get debt when I just have this cash I'm spending here, and let's execute and spend? And so part of this deterioration is some general market trends that you don't want to issue more debt. Some of it is true deferred maintenance, but some of it is you just have great liquidity and you're spending it down as you should because you don't need that much more, and so it is. So this just, to me, shows if there's more debt taken on, it's not an immediate credit impact because we've had very high ratings for a very long time, and in that time period, the debt has been higher in the past. So we'll talk about why you're issuing debt, what the trends are, what the changes may be, but for the most part, we're seeing debt as an opportunity for many states to solve some of their problems as they do this. Now, that being said, pensions for the past decade have been improving. Pensions, we've seen increased pension discipline through the pandemic. So much of these surpluses have been done for additional blocks into the pension funds. That's coming along well. Other post-employment benefits aren't a problem anywhere, but for some states, they are larger than their debt and pension obligations. And so that challenge can come up. We're seeing some states balance with that as well. But for the most part, debt as debt is a possible opportunity. So the rainy day funds is something that I want to talk about as well. And Erica talked about it, but you can see the chart here. In our criteria, what we write is if you want to receive the highest assessment score for our consideration of your reserve policies, it's at 8% with a demonstrated practice of pulling it in and replenishing it when you've, drawing it out and then putting it back in once you've drawn it. So we want to know how you think about using your fund. Is it just, you know, I'm going to pull it out and not think about putting it back, or this percent of revenue each year has to go back until it's back to a certain level? But that first threshold to get to the highest assessment is 8%. You can see now the last 5 or 6 years, the average is over 10%. We're up at 12. There are 30 states right now over 10%, and of those, 22, I think, have over 16%. So double what our first score would be. So what that means to, and this is just the rainy day funds, the formal set-asides. This is not your general fund surpluses. This is not additional special economic funds, anything else. This is just the rainy day. So we know there's a lot of cushion here. So in our view, if you have had the wherewithal in good times to put money away for bad times, when those bad times, those rainy days are occurring, to draw it is not a credit negative, right? If you've done it well, use it well. And I think that's something that very often is overlooked. We hear people all the time saying, oh, we can't touch our rainy day fund. That would be terrible. If it's raining, that's what it's there for. So in our view, we're going to ask, okay, do you have a plan to replenish it if you pull it out? Are you using it for something that you think you're bridging a gap to a certain time? And these are the things that are more important to us as we ask those questions than just saying, oh, they're making their rainy day fund smaller. That's a bad thing. No, it could be you need. And so with the credit stability, that's what we see. So I start with the economic outlook, and I mentioned how it's kind of the base for a lot of what we do in our view because those revenues are so economically derived. As I said, personal income tax, corporate income tax, sales tax, whatever it may be, they're economically driven. Now, in the economic cycle, we're not so worried about the world economy. I don't mean that crassly. It sounded crass. If you went to the BOA economist earlier today when he was talking about tariffs, he had a lot on the global economy and what the tariffs could mean. Super interesting stuff. We're not seeing tariffs as a major driver of state credit stress because those revenues that you're deriving are personal income tax, property tax for your locals, sales taxes, and they're holding. You'll see our forecast for the economy is to slow but still grow. That's a good thing. And so I think even from the Bank of America economist this morning, he was saying he still sees the economy going forward. So when the economy is going up and you are conservative by nature of who you are and what you do in these forecasts, we see some cushion and flexibility in how you manage these budgets. And I say conservativeness because when we were in the pandemic, I think the budget cycles that you all were going through in fiscal 22, 23, and 24, in each of those years, you were told as you're adopting the budgets, there's going to be a recession. Anyone you hired, anyone who was working on it was saying, this recession is coming. The indicators may have been there, but they never came. So what did states do? They budgeted responsibly. Oh, if there's going to be a recession, let's carve off a little bit. Let's not assume as much growth. Let's not assume that so much revenue will come in all these sectors. And so that ability to be conservative in your forecasting, I think, aided very well in building up the reserves, sticking money into pensions, not borrowing for debt, but paying it in cash. I think the conservative nature of how you did that was pretty positive. So what we're looking at here, you can see our growth will slow. It was 3% in 23 and 24, the national gross domestic product growth. We have it coming down to 1.7 and then 1.6. Some of these numbers are before H.R. 1, the Big Beautiful Bill. I do think there are measures in the Big Beautiful Bill that will be taken into account that could goose these up a little bit. This is not my economist speaking, this is me looking at it, but particularly the ability to expense 100% of investments that corporations now have within this bill could incentivize some growth in the businesses. That alone could have a little bit of an effect here on the economy that could be positive. So all the negative pressures I'm about to get to, I do think the strong position that states are in with good reserves and some measures that could continue to have the economy and the economically derived revenues that you all generate, there's maybe some balance between some of the pressures and some of the opportunities that you all have. You can see here unemployment rising to 4.6 by the end of the year. Probably won't get to 5, our economist is saying. The normal rate, so the rate of growth potential for GDP is 2%. So if you're 1.7 or 1.6, you're below the potential. So that's why there's some cushion to get to potential. Unemployment rate historically has been about 4.1 for the past 20 years on an average rate. So if you're above it, it's a lesser economic condition. We're about 4.2 now, so we are saying it's going to get worse for a bit. I think there are a number of pressures that I'll talk to for that. Tariffs, we're seeing them, now become a little clearer. Our economists have worked into these forecasts. I think it would be somewhere around the 13 to 15% range. It's looking like it's going to be in that 13 to 15% range. So we do think the ability is coming in. And then the Fed funds rate, our economists are saying 1 cut this year, probably late in the 4th quarter. They're not on the September bandwagon if anyone's placing those bets, but we're not saying that yet. So here's some of the detail of what we've seen and where we're going. I put on here the mortgage rate because I do think it's interesting. So much of sales taxes, the property taxes that are generated by your locals are driven by the home sales in this country. Home sales are stagnant right now. There's an underrepresentation of home sales. Within the Big Beautiful Bill, there is I think I have a slide on it, a number of low-income housing credits. They are estimating that over 10 years, there could be 1.2 million more homes being built because of some of the LIHTC provisions within the bill. That could spur it on. And if mortgage rates come down and people are more comfortable trading out their 3.5%, 4% mortgage that they're sitting on and taking on a 5%, then you could see more homes move. And when people sell their homes and move, you're buying the new carpets and you're buying the new refrigerator and whatever else you may need. And it spurs the economic sales taxes as well. So we're watching that. I put this in because CPI is something that we're looking at closely. The Fed is looking at closely. And I think you are all looking at closely as well. You can see where it was in 22, 23, really high. The yellow line there, the small yellow line, is what we have showing. We still think it's going to go up a bit before it comes back down. But really, it's not going to be that dissimilar to the inflation position that we're in now. So this is our expectation. Going to get a little worse. There's always going to be media hype around that, but operational hype and market hype will be a little different. And then it'll come back down. But I think the red line is worth noting. The red line for inflation is higher than it was in the decade before the pandemic. And so inflation may be coming back down, but it's going to come back down to a point that was different than we saw in the prior decade. So any of you who are in the legislature trying to balance your budgets when inflation was 1.6, 1.7%, and GDP growth was 1% each year, it's not going to come back to where it was 2015, 2016, but it is going to come back down and hopefully stabilize is our expectation. Now, some of the reasons why we think the potential growth rate for the nation and then in turn for states is challenged a bit. Part of it's demographics. And you can see here, the blue bars on the left, that shows in 2080, the US population peaking. That's an interesting thought, right? That the US population will begin to decline. That's something that really hasn't occurred. It's already slowing. The yellow bar is a population growth trend, and that is a declining trend. But we're seeing growth slowing, population aging, and then eventually population declining. And that'll be a meaningful challenge to state budgets when populations change. Now, I say all that because you look at the other slide, that's what, 2025, 2065, and 2100. Currently now, 20% of the population is that blue bar, that's over 65. By 2100, 30% of the population will be over 65. What happens when people are over 65? You have a different service delivery emphasis than you would when you're younger. You're not as needed of education, you're much more needing of medical. The incomes are typically more fixed as you get older, and so fluctuations in taxes make more of a difference. And so we're seeing this as a challenge. And so if you're seeing, and you probably are working fewer hours, you may still be working as over 65, but it may not be to the same hours you would have younger, so productivity is different. All these things come into play in what we're looking at, and we think this is one of the major limiting factors to keep GDP potential growth around that 2% level for the foreseeable future. It's the demographics. And as you layer in some of the immigration issues now, we're seeing that as a challenge to continue to push this as a limiting factor. If you don't have the foreign younger immigrants to go in, it could be an issue for that as well. Now, this is through 2055, so the next 30 years. Population growth is not the same everywhere. It's meaningfully different. And so there are those states that will have younger populations, younger growth. If you saw the last Medicaid panel, the Utah legislative officer was talking about, Utah is the youngest state in the nation. They have an opportunity for job growth, and I think they're taking advantage of it if you look in their budget and some of the initiatives that they put forth. And so when you have an opportunity, there are ways to see what's coming and try to structure your tax code and your business incentives in a way that support some of these demographic challenges. Other states may have to be thinking differently. If the opportunities are there, how do you service on a level with more restrictive revenue-raising opportunities? So then I'll get into some of the things that we're seeing. And so a lot of it is, as not too surprising, coming out of Washington, D.C. And you can see right now, we're looking at the same things we've been hearing about all day and yesterday here at this conference. It's tariffs, it's Medicaid, it's immigration, it's how any of this may come in, and some of the climate hazards and Federal Emergency Management Association, how they could come in and play in the budget as well. So I'll get into each, but I do want to start because we do an annual energy state piece in 9 energy states that have large mineral revenues coming in, oil or coal. And we've been writing for a long time that these states have been really outperforming the other states from what we've been seeing. Both their revenues, their economies, they've been doing really well for the past 6 or 7 years. This year in this report, we're saying it's starting to slow. It might not be that same opportunity where the energy states are going to outperform the others. We see the energy states likely slowing to a point of the other states or below. It's a lot of it is the productivity gains have been felt, and the jobs have been so reduced because of those productivity gains that there's not as much of an impact in many of these states. So we're watching it. We don't know how quick it'll occur, but we are seeing that energy states might not have the same very positive result. We've had many upgrades in those states over the past 6, 7 years. Over there, it may be more stable, and the budgets could be a little tighter, so we're watching that as well. This state, this slide, I was talking about some of the issues of, each sector is in colors. If it's a reddish color at the top, we think the impact might be a little greater for those sectors. By sectors, I mean we also rate water, sewer utilities, cities and towns, higher ed institutions, hospitals. There are issues that come into play in each. We've talked tariffs. My next slide is, my next slide is Medicaid, I think. So let me talk SNAP. So with HR 1, of so much that's in there, it is so backloaded. When states have such a strong position right now of good reserves, fine performance, forecastable, stable employment, we think there is still a relatively stable period for state credit. It can be backloaded where those pressures come in. The one thing that we've seen that's really changed from that is the provisions for the nutritional program, SNAP. A lot of what's coming is sooner. And so a lot of the administrative costs, we're talking to states, is already, in many cases, tens of millions and many tens of millions, just for the administrative costs that could increase and change as you work through these programs. So we're watching that, how that comes in. Tens of millions isn't necessarily untenable for state budgets, as large as state budgets are, but it may mean some choices and levers being pulled that something else doesn't get funded where these do. The bigger challenge, though, could be the error rate issue. When in two years, if the error rate isn't lower, the federal government is going to reduce that component for SNAP at the level of rates, then we're not talking tens of millions of dollars. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, closing in on billions in some states, billion in some states. That can be more of a budget challenge. I don't care how big your budget is. You start trying to wiggle around $1 billion here or there, that's going to, tilt some scales and make some differences. So we think the more difficult challenges will be coming then. We're watching that for SNAP, but we think this is probably coming before some of the Medicaid discussions hit. Now, so this is just some of the big, beautiful bills, details. There's the $1.2 million. Talks about Medicaid is 15% of the cuts in this. The other thing I think that's going to be interesting on this slide, and then I'll jump to the Medicaid slide, is in the bill, right, they talked about raising the federal debt ceiling. The federal debt ceiling, we think that $5 trillion increase is probably going to push the next debt ceiling debate out till late 27, maybe sometime in 2028. That's really not that far for $5 trillion. And so that is a challenge, and we do think the federal government will be looking at ways to more meaningful control those costs and try to see those spendings coming in. So the budget debt ceiling problem might be gone, but adopting the budget, we may see a government shutdown September, October period, or October into November period. And some of our economists are thinking it could be a long one in a month or two. There can be a lot of discord in Washington that would not let this budget be passed, and the federal government could stop. Now, we've regularly talked to the federal government offices to say what monies flow, what's going to the states, Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare all flow. Airport improvement programs typically flow. Water and sewer historically has flowed from the feds to the state in a government shutdown. But it's unique each time. Is it the comptroller of the government, something like that, gets to decide which agencies stay open or not? So if there is a government shutdown in a few months, watch very carefully if you're expecting flow, what's going to continue to come to your state or not, because that's something that we're watching and it can be there. So debt ceiling as part of the problem, we're not worried as much about now. We think it's going to kick out, but 3 or 4 years, it's probably going to come back unless Washington can balance their budget a little better. And then the budget adoption could do more of a shutdown sooner. All right, Medicaid cuts. This is a little different. This is, CBO and the Federal Funds Information Systems Network. There was a CBO number that was a little different in Catherine's NCSL number earlier. Hers was $930 billion. This is $980, but over 10 years, it's not that different. If you think about what the aggregate states sell, so these are some interesting numbers, I think. The general fund budget for all 50 states is about $1.3 trillion a year right now. This is over a 10-year period, $984 million in cuts. So if you think about it, it's something like over a 10-year period, 7% of your general fund would have to be would be adjusted. Now, 7% at any time is hard, but over 10 years there's a little more wiggle room. And what we've seen from states, and this is one of the discussions that I think came out of that last Medicaid session, if anyone was in it, was all these cut estimates don't take into effect the work that you will do in this room. And that's what we're looking at. We think there is a long runway here. Now, work requirements will have to come in by December 2026. Every 6 months, you'll have to check and verify people are there. That's going to take administrative costs. That could be tens of millions of dollars just to do those administrative costs. There's going to be extra costs for lesser service. It's part of the program. It is what it is. But the amount of some of these other things with eligibility, it can have people rolling off. You can decide if you want to make up the deficit from what the federal government isn't going to contribute. And as we talked about, there's a lot of funding that the states have right now, and they can decide which of these programs they may or may not want to continue. What we are hearing now is the cuts to SNAP have pretty bipartisan support, and so some of those programs for free and reduced school lunch or lunch through the summer for some school-age children, many states are saying they're going to probably spend some money for that or recommend spending money for that. Medicaid's not that answer, though. What we've heard, regardless of the color of the state that you may identify with, both sides saying if the federal government isn't going to support, we're not going to extend some of ours to continue a program that's just going to cost more in the future. So we think there are going to be educational costs. That comes into, as we've talked about today, impacts to uncompensated care funds going up. That comes into rural hospitals having a greater challenge. Those things will fall to the legislatures as those entities come hat in hand to say, can you help me? And so we are watching that. Much of that will be driven by some of the provider tax caps and cuts that won't really kick in till 28, and then it is in 28, you tick down 0.5% a year to 2032 until you get to 3.5%. Many states, what we did, I think there are like 22 states that have 5.5% measures that will have to make hard decisions. So what does that mean? Between 2028 and 2032, 22 states are going to have to make some hard decisions. That's a little ways out. I think what legislature will be looking at, and what we saw on that great slide with all the state actions in the last Medicaid piece was, look at all the studies that states are doing right now. There is a lot of good work going on to say, can we do this? Can we fund this? Should this be supplied in this way? Are there cost controls we can put in place? So we're expecting over the next few years a lot of good work from the states before any of these become directly impactful to credit. So I think it's a huge number. It's a big one. Yeah, but I do think there's some time here that we're watching where states will probably make some decisions that will control that cost exposure to you and see how sustainable it is. One thing I think is going to be super interesting that you haven't seen it, these reports are coming out, you know the states now from the NCSL slide showing who's doing the studies. Everyone can read those studies, they're public. What we're looking forward to is the Virginia, Kentucky, and Wyoming budgets that come out this winter. And I say that because those are your biennial states. They're going to go through 27 and 28, and you have 2 expansion states and 1 non-expansion state. And so just about all the provisions that are coming in for the big, beautiful bill will have to be considered as the legislature adopts it for the fiscal 28 year later this year. That is a long-term horizon that's going to, I think, have a lot of good information. It's going to be pretty telling to us all to say, oh, how are these states that maybe do expand, maybe don't, have provider taxes, have to cut provider taxes? How are they considering these programs and funding? And I think we're going to get a lot of good information just out of the state budgets. Now, they won't be adopted to maybe this time next, or a couple months ago, in a year, but we'll start to see the proposals come the wintertime. So I think that's interesting to see, to watch. Now, FEMA, we have long said FEMA has been a credit stabilizing factor. If you think about it, if you have an experienced disaster recovery team that comes in, the federal government takes 100% of your debris for a certain amount of time and then covers 90 cents on the dollar for another period of time to rebuild. That is a lot of liquidity flowing into a community to rebuild that just went through something horrific. And we've seen more and more of these disasters, and we've seen them come in. What we've often seen is the communities have recovered relatively quickly. Now, it doesn't take away from the horrific nature of these and the loss of life and the loss of property. And there's a whole economic consideration of stock and flow when you're pulling away your stock just to take your flow back to where you were. There's a lot in these that don't make sense. But we have said on a credit-wise basis, the ability of the federal government to come in with expertise and cash has benefited credit. Now, what we're seeing is there is a lot of discussion, is that the right mix of experience and tools, and should be more of it shifted to the states? And we're hearing that it's probably going to be. We don't worry too much about the expertise side of it. We think the states, what we've seen in some of the job cuts that have already been taking place at the federal government is that states, water sewer departments, public safety, a lot of the federal government workers that have been laid off, not all of them, but many have been picked up by state and locals that are still hiring. And so the shift doesn't look as bad as if you were just looking at the loss of federal employees, because there's still been job increases in state and local governments. It's just an interesting provision. We think that could continue. If some of the FEMA people leave, they're going to go to the states and aid the states that really need it. It's the money and time. One of the benefits of having a quick recovery with a lot of liquidity into a community is that your community can get back on its feet quickly. And that has people staying in their homes, rebuilding their homes, staying in those jobs, not looking to go somewhere else where their employer has to rebuild. The speed to recovery can maintain the governmental cost service delivery levels because the cash can still flow through the taxes and fees that are being collected. If that slows, because the federal government isn't there, we may see credit deterioration in places that face disasters. And that could be states, counties, cities, towns, school districts, you name it. If they don't recover to the point where they were there before, and there's a long period of degradation, of dilapidation, of unwillingness to pay or inability to pay, that's something that we'll look at, and we're trying to take some thought on right now. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't be done well, that the states and the locals can't handle it. It just may mean there's a real tax and liquidity shift here that we're watching. Yeah, and then I think this is my last slide. I just want to share, look, the role FEMA plays is national. It really isn't. You think, oh, sometimes, oh, they're just helping Florida and Texas because they keep getting hit by the hurricanes. No, really, it's derechos in Iowa, and it's flooding in North Carolina, and it's wildfires in the West. I mean, there are actions that FEMA has done to really step up and assist nationally. And so it is something that we do think that the responsibility is there, but if the disasters occur and there isn't the experience to manage and fund the recovery, it could have a greater impact. You know, so I'm happy to take any questions, and Erica too, but it is one where, no, you don't need that slide, that's nothing. It is one where we're looking that the states are in a very, very strong position right now, about the strongest we've ever seen states. We haven't had a downgrade of a state since 2021. You start looking at a 5-year window. I'm not sure you're going to find another 5-year window where some state hasn't gotten into some fiscal challenge where they where we haven't adjusted the rating because of what's happening in the state. It's a long run, and a lot of that long run is, I think, conservative budgeting in times of uncertainty. I think it's reduction of debt. It is high reserves. It is improving pension positions, and it's a generally strong economy growing between 2 and 3%. So we'll see what happens with all these challenges we talked about, be it FEMA, be it immigration, be it Medicaid shifts, be it SNAP shifts. But right now, our economists are still saying slow growth, so we're thinking there is an opportunity for a limited time here, 3 to 5 windows, where we think states will have to make the hard decisions so that the out years aren't harder. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Questions for Jeff?
Hi, Jeff. John Ball from Utah. Big fan.
Hey.
A lot of your slides cited government data sources,
Yes.
like the BLS and census, and I asked your colleague from S&P this question yesterday. Do you still believe those? Given the furor in the last few days, do you still believe those sources? If you do or don't, what do you do to correct for the uncertainty around their accuracy?
I think government data, yeah, well, the simple answer is yes, I still believe those. A lot of the work, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is not done by one person, but they're done of teams of hundreds, right? And so to make adjustments and changes are going to be really hard to skew in ways that are being challenged right now. So I do still believe. That doesn't mean that the information might be different from one source to another, and that's some of the interesting work that we look at. I was talking to some of the NCLSL colleagues earlier today. My company at the rating agency merged with another company called IHS Markit. They're a group of large economists. So we have a large group of economists at IHS Markit, now called Market Intelligence. And then we have the economists that we've always used at S&P Global Ratings. And all our ratings and all those metrics I shared are from our S&P Global Ratings economists. They will publish data and forecasts and different time cycles than the Market Intelligence. I can still see the Market Intelligence stuff through a link on my desktop. They're not always the same. That's the interesting discussion. Why are there differences? And who's making those differences? And is there data quality issues where if you're just looking at ADP data, are they just forecasting from the people that use the ADP software system, and so some of the data for jobs from somebody else could be different? Well, that's good to know, though, because you know at least what ADP is thinking and what their data is showing. So I do think that we are a huge ingester of government data. I read your audits and I love them. I really read your budgets and I love them. So keep it up. And my mother thinks I'm nuts. But you know, it is one of those things where the government data is so insightful and so helpful and is so influential in capital markets that if there ever is a true question of, is this viable data, I'd hope we'd find an alternate source. And if not, there's a bigger problem. But right now, I do still believe in the data.
I had a question about your debt slide. I
Yes.
think I saw the bottom line show that debt per capita was increasing, even as debt as a percentage of government was decreasing.
Yes.
Does that mean that debt is increasing, but not as quickly as government revenues are increasing? Is that?
Exactly.
Okay,
Government revenues or government expenditures. And typically you'd have both to go up in the government space. Sometimes expenditures go up and you use one-time revenue sources. And so we try to show more a balance of recurring revenues, so we don't always include in those calculations one-time revenues. But yeah, so I'm not sure if that slide was, but it's exactly that. The debt can still be borrowed, and it's still a high number. We're seeing regular billion-dollar borrowings from states, and yet the state wages are going up higher. State contracts with providers are costing more. And so even though you're still issuing debt, the amount of debt that's being issued is less than the amount of the increase in growth of those other expenses. Yeah. So we have here too. We're ready to go? Okay. Hey.
Hi, Jeff. I'm Paige with the Pew Charitable Trust.
Yes.
You mentioned you read state audit reports. I also read state audit reports. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the delays in state audit reports that we're seeing across the country and how that impacts states' credit rating and general financial management.
So, yeah, absolutely. So there has been a long trend for a few years now of fewer and fewer public auditors able to support local government audits. I'll get to that in a second. We do see, though, some of these big provider provisions at states, when they convert over their data systems, it also is slowing some releases of those audits so that they're late. When we say the SEC that we're going to rate bonds and here's how we do it, what we say is we need data no later than 2 years old. So those of you from California, Illinois right now that don't have budget audits out from 2023, we have to put a special note in our report saying to the SEC, we recognize this is late, it recognize we're not complying with what we tell you, but we have good discussions with the state and we get the comptroller's dailies, we get monthly reports, so we have it. So at a state level, we have to formally make that change to accept and continue to rate the state at that level. For the locals, what we've been doing recently has been reviewing in early April what states don't have an audit that's up to 2 years old, and then putting out a list. And that list has grown from 54 to 79 to 146 to 181 of our credits. Now again, we rate 17,000 roughly individual entities, and so if they don't have audits, we're talking less than 200. It's not a huge number, but it's a growing number. And if we contact those issuers and they say, we're not going to get it, we don't have that same daily revenue information. We don't have the management team's sophistication as we do at the state level. And so we have been withdrawing ratings. And that's not helpful to the marketplace, because at one point we said, oh, we think you're going to repay your debt at an A level. And now we're saying we don't know how they're going to repay the debt, and the bond buyers don't like that. And so it is an issue right now on the quality and timing. And I'd say for states, it's typically related to conversions of big systems, and it just delays for a while. And I guess Illinois has 3 straight audits going on at the same time. I bet California does too, as they're working on getting these up to date. We're hoping to have them back on a more regular schedule soon. But for the locals that don't have that sophistication or explanation, and most often what we hear is, I just can't hire the auditor, there aren't enough of them. That's a challenge. So. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I wish I could share your optimism. So, Senator Lewis Young from Maryland.
Yes.
We're a pretty healthy state, relatively speaking,
Yep.
but transportation funding is shrinking because the gas tax doesn't keep up with demands anymore. 2 greatest areas of our budget are education and healthcare. Federal funding is shrinking there.
Yep.
We've lost more federal workers than any other state last month, and because we have a hiring freeze, they're not being employed in state government. Sure, wages are increasing slightly, but not relative to the cost of living. We have a healthy rainy day fund, but that's for a one-time expense, not a reoccurring expense. So what am I missing in your optimism?
Well, I appreciate that, and actually I'm pretty familiar with the Maryland rating. The DMV is one of the areas that has greater exposure to the federal cuts and some of the changes that are happening, and so we have been watching that, and I know there have been rating actions in Maryland and in the area, not from us. We are still looking at what Maryland can do and how you are doing it. Now, that being said, some of the cuts that are happening with National Institutes of Health and the Education Department, and who else was in Maryland? It was, some of the departments that are really being cut are Maryland-based, whereas the other part of the DMV and the Virginia side with Homeland Security and the CIA and NSA and all being in Virginia more, they may maybe have a little more stability, and I'm not promising anything to Virginians. But you know, we've been trying to gauge some of those issues. And there absolutely are pressures for education funding, and we're seeing that coming out, and some of the education programs that are there. I'm not optimistic that there won't be credit challenges, and there might not be, and there will be credit downgrades, but I'm saying that the the time provided for some of the changes can provide state legislators to make changes, and they may be hard or they may be impossible to make, but I think of all the pressures you cited, we've absolutely seen and we understand, and I think in different states it really varies of how great they are, and I do think Maryland is a state that has much greater exposure than some of these other states. One thing I've said, and this doesn't, don't take this home, but it's, I was a finance director for 2 cities here in Massachusetts for a while, and so I went to the bond ratings, and my bond ratings then were an A+, you know, and I loved my city. I was delivering great services, the education was good. It's just we didn't have a reserve policy, right? We didn't have an ability to generate a reserve. It was a couple of below census tract parts of both of those cities, and so we couldn't raise taxes high enough because it would really balance. You know what? My A+ city was a fantastic place to live, and I was proud of it, and I wanted to be there. Again, we don't go back and say a AAA has to be a AAA because it's always there and it's the best way to be. There are ways that governments can operate with a slightly lower rating that might not be as impactful as others. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to get a lower rating. I value the relationship that we have with all the states and the very high ratings from the good work you all do. I'm saying that concept of what a rating is for and how it's used is sometimes funny to listen to.
Great. Well, I'm sure Jeff will stick around for a few more minutes if you have questions after, but thank you so much for your presentation, Jeff.
Thank you.